Halloween had always been Tommy's favorite night of the year. Other kids loved Christmas or birthdays, but for Tommy, nothing beat October 31st. The candy, the costumes, the chance to be someone or something else. That year, he was determined to outdo his friends. "I don't want to be Spider-Man again," he told his mom. "I want something scary this time, something nobody else has." She smiled, thinking he'd settle on a cheap vampire cape or plastic skeleton mask. She didn't know the costume would find him. It was waiting at the thrift store. They almost didn't go in. It was one of those dusty second-hand shops tucked between a laundromat and an old diner. But Tommy tugged her inside, eyes wide. The store smelled of mothballs and mildew. Costumes were crammed into racks, most faded or torn. And then Tommy saw it. Hanging crooked on the back wall, away from the others, was a full costume. The fabric was deep black, stitched together with uneven seams. The mask was cracked porcelain, painted with a lopsided grin. The grin was wrong, too wide, too knowing. "Looks creepy," his mom muttered. "You sure you want that one?" But Tommy was already reaching for it. His fingers brushed the mask. The porcelain felt cold, as though it had been sitting in ice. "I want this one," he said firmly. At home, the costume hung in his room for days. His mom noticed the air smelled strange near it, like damp earth after rain. She thought about telling him to pick something else, but every time she looked at him, he was staring at the costume with a strange, almost hungry excitement. On Halloween night, he finally put it on. The fabric was clammy, as though it had been waiting. It clung to his skin, tightening the more he pulled it. When he slipped the mask over his face, there was a faint suction sealing against him. He laughed, but his laugh sounded wrong, too deep, too hollow. Neighbors later said the same thing. They heard him shouting, "Trick or treat," like the other kids, but his voice carried strangely, echoing down the street. And the mask? It didn't look like a mask at all. The grin seemed to stretch wider as the night went on, the cracks crawling deeper. A few parents asked him where he got it. Tommy never answered. He just tilted his head, the grin catching the glow of the jack-o'-lanterns. By 9:08 p.m., his mom began to worry. He hadn't come back. She walked the neighborhood calling his name. Parents shook their heads. Yes, they'd seen him. He'd come to their door. But each time they thought something was strange. He never blinked. His footsteps didn't make a sound. Finally, she found him at the edge of the woods, standing motionless under a streetlight. His candy bag lay at his feet. "Tommy," she whispered. Slowly, he turned. The mask's grin seemed wider now, split almost to the ears. His eyes behind the mask were too dark, and when he spoke, it wasn't his voice. Almost midnight. She rushed forward, grabbing the mask, trying to pull it off. It wouldn't budge. The porcelain seemed fused to his skin. "Hold still!" she cried, tugging harder. The fabric of the costume pulled with it, tightening around his body like living skin. Tommy screamed, but it wasn't a child's scream. It was layered, echoing, animalistic. The sound carried down the block, making porch lights flicker. Neighbors came running. They tried scissors, knives, tearing the fabric apart. Each time, the costume sealed itself back together, the seams knitting closed before their eyes. The mask's grin widened, cracks spreading like veins. At 11:45, Tommy collapsed, shaking. His breathing grew shallow. His mom begged, sobbing, "Please, take it off him, please." The mask's dark eyes shifted to her. And then Tommy stood. His movements weren't his anymore. His arms hung loose, but his head tilted in that unnatural angle, the mask grinning wider. Two voices spoke at once, Tommy's and something older, deeper. "I like this one, I'll keep it." The seams pulled tighter. The costume seemed to sink into his skin. His fingers twitched unnaturally, bones popping as they stretched. Midnight struck, and Tommy stopped being Tommy. His eyes behind the mask went completely black. He turned away, walking into the woods. His mom screamed, clutching his arm, but the costume moved him forward with inhuman strength. One neighbor swore the trees bent slightly as he entered, branches curling like hands reaching to welcome him. Search parties scoured the forest for weeks. They found only his candy bag, half buried in the dirt. The costume was gone. The thrift shop denied ever selling it. The owner insisted no such costume had ever been on their racks. When police checked, the back corner where it hung was empty, dust undisturbed, as if nothing had been there for years. But every Halloween after, the whispers began. Parents claimed to see a child in a cracked porcelain mask, standing silently at the end of their street. Sometimes he trick-or-treated with other kids, silent, his bag dragging behind him. Sometimes he stood in doorways, staring until the lights flickered out. And sometimes, if you looked long enough, the mask grinned wider. No one knows where he goes after midnight. Some say he's still searching, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood wearing the costume that chose him. Others say the costume is always looking for new children. Each Halloween it appears in a thrift shop, a yard sale, a pop-up store. And when a child slips it on, the cycle begins again. So if your son or daughter ever finds a costume that feels too cold, too heavy, too alive, don't let them wear it. Because once midnight comes, it's no longer your child inside. The costume is wearing them. And costumes like these never take themselves off. Halloween in Ridgeway was always ordinary. Kids in costumes, porch lights glowing, bowls of candy running out too fast, parents walking behind their children, sipping cider from travel mugs. But on October 31st, 2012, the town woke to something no one could explain. Pumpkins, dozens, hundreds, lined perfectly along the sidewalks, every street, every corner. Each pumpkin identical in size and shape, carved with the same jagged grin, the same wide eyes. Each one already lit, candles flickering inside, though no one had lit them. They stretched in an unbroken line that wound through the neighborhoods, across the park, and into the woods beyond the town. The jack-o'-lantern path. At first, people thought it was a prank. Maybe a church group, maybe teenagers. But no one could explain how so many appeared overnight, or how they glowed so perfectly in sync. By mid-morning, police officers tried removing a few. They loaded them into trucks, dumped them in bins. But by evening, the pumpkins had reappeared, back in perfect formation, glowing brighter. Neighbors whispered that the faces were different now. Slightly changed. Smiles sharper. Eyes watching. Kids, curious and fearless, followed the trail first. A group of middle schoolers filmed themselves with shaky phone cameras, laughing as they walked into the woods. The deeper they went, the closer the pumpkins stood together. The flickering light grew steadier, too steady, as if every flame pulsed to the same heartbeat. One boy swore he saw a face in the flame. The video ended suddenly, mid-laughter. Hours later, their phones were found scattered in the dirt, still recording. The kids were gone. That night, parents searched frantically. The police blocked off the woods, but the pumpkins kept glowing, leading inward like a trail of lanterns. Some swore they heard laughter, children's laughter, echoing from the trees. Others swore they heard chanting, low rhythmic in a language no one recognized. Richard Miller's daughter was one of the missing. At midnight, he couldn't wait any longer. Armed with a flashlight, he stormed past the barricades and into the woods. The pumpkins lit his path, grins glowing wider the deeper he went. His flashlight flickered, growing weaker. Then he noticed the faces. At first, it was a trick of light. A smile stretched differently, an eye wider than before. But then he froze, because one pumpkin bore his daughter's face. Carved perfectly, her frightened eyes, her open mouth. The next pumpkin showed another missing child and another. Dozens of them, all staring. Richard screamed, smashing the pumpkins with his flashlight. Seeds and pulp splattered across the leaves. But ahead of him, new pumpkins appeared instantly, flickering stronger. The grins widened, sharper now, and from between the trees he saw them. Figures shaped like children, glowing faintly orange from within. Their faces burned with the same carved grins. They beckoned him deeper. The next morning, his wife found his flashlight at the wood's edge. It was sticky with pumpkin pulp. Richard was gone. And when neighbors opened their doors, they found pumpkins sitting on their porches, freshly carved with his face. By dawn, every pumpkin had vanished. The streets were clear, the woods silent. But every year after, the path returned, never in the same place twice. Sometimes in small towns, sometimes in cities, weaving through alleys and over bridges. Always on Halloween, always leading somewhere dark, and always taking new faces. Historians dug through archives. They found records of similar events stretching back centuries. Villages waking to find pumpkin paths leading to the forest. Families disappearing. Children's faces carved into gourds the next morning. It wasn't a prank, it wasn't new. It was ritual. Now people whisper warnings. If you wake on Halloween and find glowing pumpkins lined along your street, don't follow. Don't touch them. Don't even open your door. Because by midnight, the path will demand a sacrifice. And if no one walks it willingly, the pumpkins will choose for themselves. So if you ever see that trail of flickering grins leading into the woods, stay inside. Because by morning, someone's face will be carved among them. And once the path claims you, you don't come back. Halloween night in Fairview was always loud. Children shrieked with laughter. Porch lights glowed orange. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered from every step. Dogs barked at costumes. Parents waved from driveways, and the sound of footsteps echoed endlessly across sidewalks. The Harpers lived at the end of Birch Lane. They didn't have kids at home anymore, but they loved decorating. Plastic skeletons in the yard, fake cobwebs stretched across the bushes, a giant bowl of candy waiting by the door. At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. The first group of trick-or-treaters arrived, their costumes bright and cheerful. Candy dropped, voices chirped. "Thank you." Normal, but half an hour later everything changed. The knock came softly at first, not the playful doorbell ring of excited children, a deliberate knock. When Mr. Harper opened the door, 3 children stood waiting. They were dressed strangely, old-fashioned. One boy wore suspenders and a paper mask with eye holes unevenly cut. A girl wore a tattered witch's cloak, the fabric fraying, the broomstick crooked. The tallest wore a porcelain mask with no mouth, smooth and pale. They didn't speak. They only held out their bags. The Harpers chuckled nervously, dropped in candy and waited. But the children didn't move. They only turned in perfect unison, walking away in silence. 20 minutes later, the knock came again. The same 3 stood there. The same costumes, still silent. This time, their candy bags sagged half empty. The Harpers frowned. Hadn't they just given them sweets? They dropped in more, shut the door. But when Mrs. Harper reviewed the porch camera the next morning, she noticed something chilling. The 3 children had walked away, but their reflections never appeared in the front windows behind them. As the night wore on, the knocking became relentless. Every 20 minutes, then 10, then 5. Always the same trio. Each time they returned, their costumes looked more decayed. The boy's paper mask hung in tatters. The witch's cloak was damp with mud, dragging leaves. The porcelain mask now bore cracks, spreading like veins. Their bags grew lighter, emptier. By 11 p.m., the bags hung limp, nearly hollow, but still they held them out waiting. Mr. Harper grew uneasy. "We should turn the lights off," he muttered. "Pretend we're out of candy." They did. They blew out the pumpkins, pulled the blinds, silenced the porch light. But at 11:15, the knocking returned. Louder. Bang, bang, bang. Mrs. Harper peeked through the blinds. The three children stood on the porch, heads tilted upward. Their dark eyes behind their masks seemed fixed on her. Slowly, in perfect unison, their heads turned to face the window she was peeking from. She stumbled back, heart hammering. The knocking grew violent. Desperate, Mr. Harper flung open the door. "Enough!" he shouted. "You've had your candy. Go home." The children didn't move. He tried to slam the door shut, but the porcelain-masked figure raised its hand. The fingers were gray, stretched too long. Inhuman. The door wouldn't close. With a yell, Mr. Harper forced it shut. The hand withdrew. The porch went black. Their pumpkins had gone out. But the knocking continued. By midnight, the house shook with it. Every window rattled. The pounding echoed from every wall. The Harpers huddled in the living room, holding each other, as the sound grew unbearable. Then suddenly silence. They barely dared to breathe. 1 minute. 2. Then from the back door, tap, tap, tap. Mrs. Harper whispered, "They're inside." The next morning, neighbors noticed the Harper house was silent. The candy bowls overturned, the porch decorations smashed. On the steps sat 3 fresh jack-o'-lanterns, each carved with perfect likenesses of the Harpers' faces, mouths wide, frozen in silent screams. Other neighbors began to whisper. They too had seen strange trick-or-treaters that night, silent, old-fashioned, coming to the same houses again and again, their bags never staying full. One woman swore she gave them candy 4 times. By the 5th, their bags were empty, and their faces looked darker, hollow, as though the masks had fused to their skin. By morning, she found a pumpkin on her porch carved with her husband's face. Historians dug through archives. Fairview had legends, stories of children who had vanished one Halloween night in 1913 after leaving home to trick-or-treat. They were never found. Some believed they had returned, trapped in their costumes, searching endlessly for candy they could never keep. And each Halloween, when their bags ran out, they took something else. Now in Fairview, people leave candy bowls on their porches long after midnight. They don't open their doors, but sometimes the bowls are emptied and the knocking still comes. And when it does, the porch cameras show 3 figures standing there, silent, patient, waiting. So if you hear constant knocking this Halloween, don't answer. Don't peek through the blinds. And above all, never let their bags go empty, because once the candy runs out, they'll take something else. And the next jack-o'-lantern carved may bear your face. Halloween in Oak Ridge was usually quiet. The same handful of streets, the same kids in store-bought costumes, the same adults standing on porches pretending to be surprised. The town wasn't known for wild parties or urban legends. But in 1998, 4 teenagers found a party that shouldn't have existed. Melissa, Ryan, Claire, and Jason were seniors, restless that Halloween night. They'd outgrown trick-or-treating, but nothing else in town was happening. So they piled into Jason's car and drove through the neighborhoods, music low, talking about how boring Oak Ridge was. That's when they saw it. At the end of Ashwood Lane stood a house none of them remembered. It looked like an old Victorian, gables, steep roof, wide porch, but lit up brilliantly. Jack-o'-lanterns lined the steps, flickering in perfect unison. Music thumped faintly inside. Shadows of dancing figures crossed the windows. On the front door was a sign in curling black letters. Halloween party, all welcome. The teens exchanged nervous glances. "This wasn't here last year," Claire whispered. "Or any year," Ryan muttered. But Jason grinned, parking the car. Finally, something cool in this dead town. He climbed the porch steps. Before he could knock, the door opened. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of pumpkin spice, cider, and something sweeter, almost metallic. Dozens of people in costumes filled the rooms. Skeletons, witches, clowns, masked dancers. Laughter and music spilled from every corner. Candles dripped wax down iron sconces. A girl in a flapper dress glided over, her smile too wide, lipstick smeared. She handed Melissa a cup of punch. Melissa sipped. It was warm, thick, not right. "What's in this?" she asked. The girl tilted her head, teeth glinting strangely sharp. Tradition. At first, they played along. Jason danced with masked strangers. Claire wandered the parlor, running her hand along the furniture. Ryan stood stiffly, uneasy. Something was off. The decorations were too old. The streamers faded, the wallpaper peeling. Every jack-o'-lantern looked real, but their candles never flickered. Ryan glanced at the photographs on the walls. Black and white pictures of parties long ago. Every guest in the photos wore costumes. Every smile was far too wide. Melissa coughed suddenly, spitting her punch back into the cup. The liquid was black now, thick as oil. She dropped it, glass shattering. Nobody reacted. The dancers kept moving, music thumping. But slowly, the costumed guests began circling the teens. Their masks turned toward them, one by one, until every eye in the room was fixed on the four outsiders. The music slowed, replaced by a low hum, chanting. "Time to go," Claire whispered. They pushed toward the door. But the door was gone. In its place was a blank wall, wallpaper stretched over where the frame had been. The guests stepped closer, hands cold and clammy when they brushed against Jason's arm. "Stay," one of them whispered, voice muffled behind a mask. "Stay forever." Panic surged. The teens bolted upstairs, looking for another exit. The upper floor was worse. Every room was filled with costumes hanging on hooks, masks staring with hollow eyes. Some were cracked, some were stitched, and some looked like human skin stretched taut. The air was stifling, smelling of smoke and rot. Jason swore he heard voices whispering his name. Ryan thought he saw faces behind the masks, shifting faintly, watching. They kicked open a window, glass shattering, and leapt. They hit the dirt hard. When they scrambled up, the house was gone. Only an overgrown lot remained, weeds curling over cracked stone. No music, no lights, just silence. Police searched the area. Neighbors insisted no house had stood there for decades, not since the fire in 1953. That Halloween night, a party had raged in the same Victorian. A fire broke out, consuming the house in minutes. Dozens of guests were trapped inside, none ever found. Locals whispered the house never left. It waited. Melissa, Ryan, Claire, and Jason swore never to speak of it again. They moved away after graduation, but each Halloween, they dreamed the same dream. Dancing in that house, punch in their hands, masks closing in, and in every dream the house burned. Years later, in 2015, trick-or-treaters swore they saw lights at the end of Ashwood Lane, music drifting faintly, shadows moving in the windows of an empty lot. One group of kids claimed a woman in a flapper dress waved them inside. They were never seen again. Now, Oak Ridge parents warn their children, if you see a house on Halloween you don't remember, no matter how loud the music, no matter how bright the lights, don't go in. Because once the party starts, it never ends. And once you join the guests, you'll dance forever. Maya wasn't the type to get excited about Halloween anymore. 16 felt too old for trick-or-treating and too young to ignore the holiday altogether. She wanted something different this year, something that would make her stand out. That's how she found the mask. The temporary Halloween store had popped up in an abandoned strip mall like it always did. Shelves groaned under plastic fangs, rubber machetes, and polyester cloaks. Maya drifted through the aisles, unimpressed, until she saw it. It wasn't hanging on a rack. It wasn't wrapped in plastic like the others. It was sitting in a black box at the very back of the store. A porcelain mask. Its surface was bone pale, faint cracks spidering from the corners of the eyes. The lips bore a subtle, knowing smile. Not too wide, not playful. Just enough to feel wrong. When she picked it up, the porcelain was ice cold. Her best friend Liv made a face. "That looks cursed. Seriously, don't buy that." But Maya didn't answer.
She bought it anyway.
That night, she sat in front of her mirror staring at the mask. It looked heavier than it should. Finally, she slipped it on. The lining was silky, but it clung like a second skin. Her breath echoed faintly inside. When she looked in the mirror, she froze. Her lips weren't smiling, but the mask's faint smile seemed just a little wider. Her head tilted, but the reflection tilted a second later as if catching up. Her chest tightened. She ripped the mask off, gasping. Her cheeks stung like the porcelain had burned her skin. She tossed it onto her bed and told herself she wouldn't wear it again. But at the Halloween party the next night, she felt invisible among kids in flashy costumes. Nervous, she slipped the mask on again. Suddenly, everyone noticed her. Strangers leaned closer when she spoke. They laughed at everything she said. People stared at her like she was magnetic. The mask made her perfect, for a while. In the bathroom, Maya looked in the mirror, and her blood ran cold. Her reflection's faint smile widened slowly, stretching unnaturally across its face. When Maya raised her hand, her reflection hesitated, then moved a second too late. And when she forced herself to frown, her reflection just kept smiling. Terrified, she clawed at the mask. It resisted, almost glued to her skin before tearing free with a painful sting. She stuffed it into her bag and told herself she would throw it away. The next morning, the mask sat on her dresser. She threw it in the trash. By nightfall, it was back. She hurled it into the river. The next morning, it lay on her pillow, perfectly dry, cracks spreading wider. She begged Liv to take it. Liv agreed, hesitantly. She hid it in her closet. But that night, Liv called in a panic. "Maya," she whispered. "My reflection. It's smiling at me. And I'm not smiling." The girls tried everything, smashing it with a hammer, locking it away, even burying it. But each time it returned, always faintly smiling. The more they fought it, the stronger it seemed to grow. By the third night, Maya noticed her reflection moving differently. When she looked away, she swore her reflection stayed staring back. And sometimes, when she wasn't smiling, her reflection was. Now Maya keeps every mirror covered. She tapes her phone camera. She avoids her reflection in windows. But it doesn't matter. Sometimes, in the corner of her eye, she sees herself smiling when she isn't. And sometimes, late at night, she hears it, faint tapping on her mirror, like porcelain fingernails, as if something inside is asking to come through. You've just crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown. If you felt the fear tonight, make sure to subscribe before you leave, because on this channel, every story is just the beginning. New nightmares arrive every few nights, each one darker than the last. Until then, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open. You are now part of the FearBound family.